life, and as a result of Citizens United, our political life as well. And that's what oligarchy is about. Oligarchy is when a handful of people have the power. They control the media, they control the political process, they control the economy. For example, you have a family, many of you know who they are, called the Koch brothers. You know the Koch brothers. And right now, this is the second wealthiest family in America. They're worth between 80 and 100 billion dollars, one family. And for them, it is chump change to spend hundreds of millions of dollars trying to elect right-wing Republicans who will represent the interests of the wealthy and the powerful. Chump change. What's a few $100 million when you are worth 80 to 100 billion dollars? And that is exactly what they are doing today. So when we talk about where we are as a nation, our job is to revitalize American democracy. Our job is to overturn this disastrous Supreme Court decision on Citizens United. Our job is to move toward public funding of elections so that if anybody here wants to run for whatever office, you don't have to spend half of your life begging wealthy people for campaign contributions. So trying to revitalize American democracy and defeating the trend toward oligarchy is, to me, enormously important. No issue out there more important. And what we are seeing with Trump is, despite all of his rhetoric, as I mentioned earlier, his cabinet has more billionaires in it than any cabinet in American history. The poor guys are only worth $5 or $10 million. That is not a cabinet designed to represent the needs of ordinary Americans. Now, the next issue that I talk about is an issue also that has to be addressed, and where, in fact, the Democrats, by and large, have been pretty weak. And that is to talk about the decline of the American middle class. Now, the Democrats and I often say, and it is true, that the economy at the end of Obama's term was a hell of a lot better than it was when he first came to office. That's true. But there is another truth out there. And the truth is that despite the gains under Obama, there are tens and tens of millions of people today who are existing in incredible pain and despair. Here in West Virginia, in Kentucky, and many other parts of this country, for the first time in the modern history of America, people's life expectancy is going down. What modern history is about is a result of public health advances, as a result of improvements in healthcare. Generally speaking, we live longer than our parents, who lived longer than their parents, who lived longer than their parents. But right now, unbelievably, in America today, we have millions of people whose life expectancy will be lower than their parents. Now, why that is, people are writing books about it, but I think it has a lot to do with despair. It has a lot to do with a guy who once had a good job producing something, and then one day his job went to Mexico or China, and now he's working for 50% of the wages that he used to get, and he's making $8 or $9 an hour. And his kid will never be able to afford to go to college, and he's looking around in despair. And he and others, they're turning to opiates, they're turning to drugs, they're turning to suicide because of that despair going on all over this country. We have to recognize that reality. We got to step in and say to our fellow Americans that in the richest country in the history of the world, you and your children are going to be treated with dignity. You are going to have opportunity. Think about it. And these are the issues that need to be talked about, which is why we're going to go back to McDowell County. Just think about it. You are a single mother in America, and maybe you're doing okay. You're making $30,000, $40,000 a year. Do you know how much child care, good quality child care costs? It costs $10,000, $15,000 a year. How in God's name are you going to get your child good quality child care, which you want, which you need because you need child care for you to go to work? How do you do that and pay $10,000, $15,000 a year when you're making $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year? How do you do that? Put gas in the car, pay for your health care needs, pay your rent or your mortgage. How do you do that? Well, you don't. You are in pain and you are hurting. What happens if you are 55, 58 years of age in America today and you are one of the 50% of older workers, 55 to 65, who has nothing, zero, in the bank for retirement? Put yourself in the place of a 60-year-old worker. You're going to retire in 5 years, and you got nothing in the bank other than the Social Security that hopefully the Republicans will not destroy. How do you feel? You are scared to death. You don't want to be dependent on your kids. You want to maintain your independence and your dignity. You got nothing in the bank because for the last 20 years, your wages barely kept up with your expenses. How do you feel if you are in Vermont or West Virginia and you get sick, but you cannot afford to go to the doctor because you got a $5,000 deductible? And I have talked to too many doctors in my state and others around the country who tell me that patients die. Patients walk into their office very, very sick. And the doctor said, "Why didn't you come to me a year ago when you first saw that lump, when you first felt that pain?" And then people say, "Well, I didn't have any insurance or I had a high deductible." And some of those people, because they walk into the doctor's office too late, some of those people die. We lose tens of thousands of people every single year because they don't go to the doctor when they should. How do you feel if you are sick today and you can't afford to go to the doctor? How do you feel if you have a bright son or daughter who studies hard and does well, who dreams of being the first in the family to go to college, as I was in my family, but you can't afford to send that kid to college? How does that feel? So yes, Democrats are right that we are better off today than we were when George W. Bush left office. But we are still missing a very, very significant point. And that is millions of people are living in despair. They are living in fear. And this should not be happening in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. That's the chapter, in a sense, deals with the decline of the middle class. And know this, that over the last 35 years, the Republicans don't tell you, you're not going to see this on TV. The mantra out there is, well, we have a large debt, which we do, something like $19 trillion, a lot of money, and therefore we got to cut programs for working families. What they do not tell you is that over the last 35 years, there has been a massive transfer of wealth from the middle class to the top 1/10 of 1%. That they somehow forget to tell you. And when we talk about revitalizing, rebuilding the middle class, one of the things we have to do is transfer that wealth back from the 1/10 of 1% back into the pockets of the middle class of this country. And there is a chapter called Ending a Rigged Economy. And essentially, what do we have to do? Well, let me just point out a few things that you have to. For a start, in the United States of America today, people should not be working 40 or 50 hours a week and living in poverty. We have got to raise the minimum wage to a living wage, $15 an hour. In the United States of America, women should not be earning 79 cents on the dollar compared to men. We need pay equity for women. In America, our infrastructure, that means our roads, our bridges, our water systems, our wastewater plants, our rail system, our airports, our levees, and our dams are crumbling in many parts of the country. During the campaign, I went to Flint, Michigan, and it was one of the most difficult meetings that I've ever been to in my life, because my wife and I just met backstage with 7 or 8 people whose families had been impacted by lead in the water. And I will never forget, as long as I live, a woman describing what happened to her daughter, who had been a very bright, gregarious kid, doing well in school, but after drinking a lot of that lead in the water, ended up in special education, having a hard time remembering simple things. But it is not just Flint, Michigan. All over this country, there are communities struggling with clean water. Yep. I remember, right. Exactly. All right. So what you do when you are the wealthiest country in the world, what you do when your infrastructure is crumbling, it doesn't take a genius to figure it out. You rebuild that infrastructure and you put 15 million people back to work at good wages. What this country looks like when we got people rebuilding our roads and our bridges and our water systems, when we have people in all different kinds of jobs pitching in to give us the kind of infrastructure a 21st century people need. So figuring out how we expand the middle class, raising the minimum wage, creating a tax system which is fair, which tells Donald Trump and his fellow billionaires that they are going to start paying their fair share of taxes. Moving. Every psychologist who studies the issue tells us that the ages of 0 through 4 are the most important years in terms of human development. And yet we have God knows how many children all over this country who are not getting the kind of early childhood nurturing and education that they deserve. We can create a state-of-the-art, universal child care system in America. In my view, and it is not simply my view, it is the view of the almost unanimous position of scientists who have studied the issue, climate change is real, it is caused by human activity, and climate change is already causing devastating problems in our country and around the world. And what the scientists tell us is that if we do not transform our energy system away from fossil fuel, what we will be seeing, just think about it for a second, more drought, more floods, more extreme weather disturbances, more rising sea levels. We will be seeing more conflict around the world as people fight over limited natural resources. All right? Now, to my mind, what that means is when the scientific community is virtually unanimous, it seems pretty obvious to me, although not to President Trump, that it might be a good idea to listen to science. And to invest heavily in energy efficiency, in sustainable energies like wind and solar and geothermal. Now I know, and you know, that when you transform our energy system, there are some people who are going to be hurt. Our job is to make certain that we protect those workers. It is not their fault. And that means we invest billions of dollars in rebuilding those communities, providing jobs and healthcare and education to people who may have lost their jobs as a result of that transition. In America today, we have the dubious distinction of having more people in jail than any other country on earth. We have about 2.2 million people. We're spending $80 billion a year at the local, state, and federal level locking up fellow Americans. China is a communist authoritarian country, about 4 times our size. We got more people in jail than China does. Our job is to begin to get at the cause of why we have so many people in jail and understand we need real criminal justice reform. People in jail are disproportionately African American, Latino, and Native Americans. In my very strong view, it makes a hell of a lot more sense for us to invest in jobs and education, not jails and incarceration. Today we have about 11 million people in this country who are undocumented. The vast majority of them are working hard. They've come to this country to improve their lives and the lives of their children. Vast majority of them are not criminals, but hard-working people who often are paying taxes for benefits they will not receive. Instead of demagoguing this issue, instead of trying to minimize, instead of trying to hurt and isolate these people, it seems to me to be clear that we need to move toward comprehensive immigration reform and a path towards citizenship. In America today, we have millions of senior citizens and disabled veterans who are trying to get by on $12,000, $13,000, $14,000 a year Social Security. You can do the arithmetic as well as I can, and the answer is nobody, no elderly person, no person with a disability can make it on $12,000, $13,000, $14,000 a year. Bottom line is that a great nation is not judged by how many billionaires it has. A great nation is judged by the compassion it shows to the most vulnerable people in this country. hear that some in Congress want to give, dare I say, huge tax breaks to billionaires and cut back on the needs of the most vulnerable. That is not what this country is supposed to be about, and we must not allow them to get away with that. The last chapter in the book, and if you get bored somewhere in between, go to the last chapter. It deals with corporate media. And the essence of what that chapter is about, it's not just my experience with media, and I have a lot of experience with the media, but it is that the great failing of corporate media, and there are obvious reasons for this, is media does not talk about the realities facing the American people. You can watch television, as we say in Vermont, till the cows come home, and you will not hear a discussion about income and wealth inequality. You will not hear discussions of the greed of the pharmaceutical industry. You will not hear discussions about poverty, about homelessness, about the power of the Koch brothers and a handful of other billionaires on the political process. So our demand has got to be that the media stop focusing so much on political gossip and start talking about what is going on in the lives of the American people. And during my campaign, I tried to do that. And I cannot tell you that we had a lot of success. I was followed around, as presidential candidates are, by 10, 15 media from all of the major networks and newspapers. And I deliberately went to places like Pine Ridge, South Dakota. Do you know what that reservation in Pine Ridge is about? People in that reservation have a life expectancy equivalent to the country of Guatemala, a poor third world country. I went to places in California where fracking was causing serious health problems for people. I went to tenements in public housing in New York City where old people, because the elevators weren't working, old people could not even get down to shop. Those issues got very, very little coverage. And our demand of the corporate media is start dealing with the realities of American life. Okay, I think, Dan, we are ready for some questions. I think some of you may have written some questions. Here he is, okay.